I'm Amanda Ziadeh with WashingtonExec, and today I'm joined by Jason Dury, Director in Cybersecurity Open Source Solutions for Guidehouse, to discuss supply chain security. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jason.
Amanda, it's a pleasure. Happy to be here.
So, this is a very timely conversation as October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So, in light of this, can you break down for us the cybersecurity landscape in the supply chain and what are the most important elements of the supply chain to secure?
Unfortunately, a lot of that question is it depends based on the industry that an organization finds themselves in and the potential threats and risks associated with them. The healthcare industry will have different concerns than manufacturing, which will have different concerns than consulting companies as well, and financial sector and others. A lot of the concerns these days is around crime-related issues and data loss prevention type issues. Everything is software-driven and cyber-driven these days. So that could be data breaches, financial losses, and other types of associated crime. Even more so now with the global pandemic, there's been an increasing amount of cybercrime related every year. In some cases, upwards of 30% or more increasing year over year, and over 75% to 90% of organizations across the entire market have reported an increase in supply chain and cyber related attacks.
So, can you dive a little bit deeper into what are the top supply chain security challenges?
Everything from how to get delivery to different offices and manufacturing facilities. Are the supplies readily available now, especially with the impact of shipping delays and production delays related to pandemic related issues and reduced workforces as people stay home? But then on the other side of that, increasing demand for some items and elements of the economy that were never before impacted due to the global changes. And one great example of that from a supply chain side is baby formula. We've all heard the news on those types of issues where it's just not on the shelf. And it could be random events and occurrences from walking into the store and not finding, pet food or not finding certain types of batteries or items on the shelves that should have been there. Now, if you compound that out and extend it to greater markets like manufacturing and things like the defense industrial base, where they're relying on parts and components that were already critical and potentially hard to source and find, now it becomes even more impacted across the supply chain.
So, how do you go about securing these elements of the supply chain, and how important is visibility when it comes to knowing who's involved?
I think there's two questions there, and we'll take the second part first. The idea of knowing who's involved in a supply chain. It's really important for every organization to do what we call illuminating the supply chain. And that includes everything from knowing the parts and components, whether it's hardware or software that makes up a supply chain, as well as all the vendors within that supply chain. And most organizations are adept or able to identify who may be at the first tier to two or three of a supply chain. But when you get lower in those, depending on the complexity of a supply chain, it becomes a lot tougher because in some cases you may have 10, 12, 13 layers deep in a supply chain, depending on the parts and components you're looking at. And knowing where each of those companies are, what they produce, where it is within your supply chain, and then the criticality of that part or component to the whole cycle is really important. And then if you add in the cybersecurity side, what software makes the part or component function, or the manufacturing process function for that part or component, it can become even more complex. So knowing where all those are and the interaction with an entire supply chain is really a critical function to have.
Why is it so important that we focus on supply chain cybersecurity? And how can all industries benefit from proper supply chain cybersecurity hygiene?
The real answers here are where might be elements in your supply chain be vulnerable one way or the other to a cybersecurity attack. And if you look back, a number of years, you had the Target attack where, it was both an HVAC and a payment provider where it was a weak link in the supply chain. Well, threat actors used that to ingratiate themselves into the greater system that was in the target enterprise. Knowing where those potential risks and vulnerabilities are and whether or not there's mitigation efforts that need to be put into place can help you then protect the entire supply chain. Depending on your industry, that could be a much greater aspect because you could help do things or it can help influence things like cybersecurity awareness programs, and how do you have your staff aware? How do you do data protection? How do you protect information that you may need to share with partners that should not become public? And threat actors will not always go right to the end source of what the information is that they want or the supply chain that they want to impact potentially. They'll go to where the data is available or where they can get in. And they're smart people. Knowing all of those areas and how to reduce those threat vectors is important to protect cybersecurity.